Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well, and thank you for listening to this final lecture. As you know, things got confused at the very end, in part because we have a snow day, in part because the talk with Jesus Bayan came together. Jesus Bayan Jr. came together very close to the end of the class, but I'm really glad he got to come. He made some things more complex than they might first appear. Today, and I'm going to keep this discussion brief, I want to say a few things about the class overall. One, okay. So I was encouraging you all to think about Breaking Bad as a text. It is a work of fiction, but it does speak to the real world somehow. Just as when you read Hamlet, Hamlet is saying something about a broader human condition, so does Breaking Bad. I think it does it fairly well, and that's why it has such resonance. That's why Breaking Bad matters to us beyond many other works, because it says something important. I kept encouraging you. This is why I had us watching so many episodes in class. I wanted you to watch it closely and learn to watch and read it closely. Just as when you read a great work of literature, you cannot be reading Hamlet and doing something else at the same time and expect to understand it fully. You have to do that with Breaking Bad to see what the artist is saying and what else is in the series that maybe even the author is not fully aware of. That's the same as when you read something like Hamlet. This is a work of art, a serious work of art, and it holds my interest. I think it should hold yours. In that context, just as within film, there are different genres, and it's important that you think about that. There were different genres within Breaking Bad. It was one, a Western, but it wasn't only a Western. There was the debate whether it's a post-Western as well. And it's an example of the Gothic, something we didn't get enough time to talk about. It is also clearly a mafia film or a mob movie as well, a gangster film. But these are the ones that I'm holding you responsible for this class. You should know how it's a Western or a post-Western or it's got a Gothic work. In addition to that, we spent time thinking about critical regionalism, the issue of the local, the regional, the transnational, and the global, and these issues of scales of analysis. That is very important. And you will not, if you don't understand how critical regionalism is about the different scales, which is in the text you've read, you didn't pay attention to the text with any kind of care. In addition to that, we saw these three different social categories, which I think we need to understand our society, but are also very helpful in thinking about Breaking Bad. The issues of race, gender, and sex, race and ethnicity, gender and sex, and also social class. And I will talk about those with more specificity. So, race. Something that I think we did find helpful is the issue of the oculi, the one about the brown oculi and the white oculi, how that is about the gaze, something I emphasized in class, but is also contained in the reading. It's the gaze from which it emanates. You can have films entirely about brown people, Hispanics, Mexicans, or black folks that are still coming from a white gaze. So when we were thinking about Breaking Bad, it clearly emanates from the white gaze, right? But when we talked to Jesus Payan, he made that more complex. He talked about the creation of the show itself, Breaking Bad. People like him had input. He asserts that he himself, in particular, had input. He says that he is the person who chose Heisenberg's glasses. He's the one who chose the hat for Walter White to become Heisenberg. We'll talk about that more as we go into the characters in a moment. But that issue of gaze, which we talked about and was particularly useful for thinking about the brown gaze, the white gaze, is also the issue of the gaze, the oculi, is helpful for thinking about gender and social class. Does this series come from a gaze that is a patriarchal gaze? Does it come from a heteronormative gaze? Does it come from an LGBTQ gaze? Does it come from a feminist gaze or the gaze of women? What gaze does it emerge from? And then who are the objects of its analysis? I think that it is a work that comes from the white gaze, and it is also thinking about Mexicans, which is interesting. And as I said when we were talking to Jesus Payan, one of the things that I think is important for us to consider, even if we're saying it comes from the white gaze, is Chicanos like it. Chicanos like Breaking Bad, and Jesus Payan is proud of his work in this series. In addition to gender, I would want you to think about social class. Does this come from a working class gaze? Does it come from a middle class gaze? Does it come from the gaze of the rich? And that's going to be pertinent in a moment. So, with regards to race, something that we in particular focused in is on the gaze. And at this point, I would encourage you to think about the final episode, which is called Felina. Felina is the song by Marty Robbins. And Marty Robbins is singing a song called El Paso about the love of a white cowboy and a Mexican woman, Felina. And as I've told you, if you've listened to the later versions of the song, you'll also know that Felina herself is a woman from Santa Fe, which is really interesting. Clearly intentional that Vince Gilligan wants us to think about these issues, the issues of this love relationship, one between a white cowboy and a Mexican woman, to highlight it in the final episode. You saw the Marty Robbins CD, it's called Felina, and you saw that song appear. He is doing something intentional with that. The song by Marty Robbins is a country western song. At the same time, it has elements of it which invoke a sort of Mexican music, Mexican or Mexican American music. It has elements of it that look like a corrido. Then, in that context, we saw earlier in the class where a narco corrido appears, negro y azul. I will remind you of the term corrido here. I spent a lot of time talking about this. In the traditional song, this is where we were talking about hegemony and counter hegemony in mainstream American society, and it looked at those people and Mexicans who were fighting with the Texas Rangers and law enforcement in the 19th century as bandits, or in the early 20th century as bandits. There were all these songs from a Chicano Mexican perspective, sung in Spanish, that reversed it. They said those bandits were actually the heroes and the Texas Rangers were the villains. In this vision, the people who had control of the moral, who were operating in a moral way, were the Mexican bandits who were standing up for their rights, which were being trampled on. They were fighting against oppression with a pistol in their hand. And that is the counter hegemonic, the oppositional story, which Mexican Americans, Mexican people in the Southwest knew. And that's why they sang the songs. Now, once we get to the world of the narco corrido, which is happening in the present, the hero in those songs doesn't have a morality on the morality on his side. Is not operating in a world of social justice. Gregorio Cortez, and we listen to that ballad, the hero of that song is operating with social justice in mind. They are that hero, Gregorio Cortez, is working in the service of what is just and correct. The hero of the narco corrido in the current moment isn't necessarily doing that. At this point, we haven't fully fleshed this out, but it's in part because I want you to take this where you will. Walter White, then, as we saw in Negro y Azul, in that song, he becomes the hero of that song, but not in the sense of Gregorio Cortez, in the sense of a narco corrido, where he is not on the side of right, but he is the hero nevertheless. We also raised the issue of gender. And I asked you to think about Skylar White. And we spent a lot of time thinking about why is it that people do not like Skylar. We didn't come up with an answer, but we refined the question. If you are one of the majority who do not like Skylar, why do so many people out there in the world dislike Skylar? One of the things which I've suggested is in this series, the only person who is truly Walter White's eagle, who always knows that what Walter White or Heisenberg is. She always knows that Walter White is Heisenberg in my reading, that because of that, she is his major antagonist. She's the one who knows. She's the one who sometimes serves as an obstacle, but is always intellectually his equal. She's a force in her own right. He is doing terrible things. He turns people into soup. He kills or almost kills children. He does all kinds of truly terrible things. Skylar seems to know, even when she doesn't know explicitly, but Skylar has got his number. And the thing is, and then people out in the world don't like Skylar and they admire Walter White. In addition to that, I would think at this point you should also think about Jesse's women, the women that are involved with Jesse. There's two Latinas, there's Jane. They're interesting in their own right and what is happening with them. And those two women, the two Chicanas that he is in a relationship with, are the only sort of Mexican American women that rise to the top, with the exception of Lydia Rodarte Cuellar, who is something else in terms of gender. Come back to that question of Walter White. That's a song where a cowboy dies beside a Mexican maiden. Who is it that Walter White dies by? In terms of social class, let's go into depth. I'm just going to now run through the characters because I want you to think about the significance of each one. We have Walter White's biological family, Walter White, Skylar, and Walt Jr. Walt Jr. is his son. I thought something we didn't talk about at any kind of length or any way, really, in this version of this class is the issue of disability. Walter White Jr. is a person who is dealing with disability. Someone could engage a lot of this class thinking about disability. There are disability studies, and that is something I did not address in depth, and I want to acknowledge, or really anyway, this time, and I want to acknowledge that. There is Marie and Hank, Marie being Skylar's sister, and Hank being the kind of sheriff in the Western genre, but his brother-in-law. There are people connected to Skylar like Ted. Ted is another character which people don't like. There's Stephen Gomez, Hank's law partner. Stephen Michael Casada came to this class 2 years ago. I hope to continue the discussion with him. There is Jesse, who is his sidekick in the Western genre. Walter White goes and looks at his son, Walter Jr., who by that time has changed his name to Flynn. But the person who he goes to rescue is not his own son, it's Jesse. Jesse is really interesting. In returning to the issues of gender, Jesse's given name, Jesse, is gender neutral. In the original script for the first episode, Jesse's name was Marion. Jesse's name is gender neutral. Marion is a name that women are usually called, but men are called as well. You've got Jesse and his comrades, the people who are working with him. You've got Skinny Pete. You've got Badger. You've got Combo who dies early on. One of the interesting, Combo is the only one who is a Chicano, by the way, and even the actor who plays Combo is not a Chicano in real life. You've got these characters, which are his initial crew when he's working at the local level. So this is the critical regionals element for what's going on in Albuquerque. Later on, he gets involved with the cartel. Locally, there's Tuco, who has wider connections to the Salamanca organization, which is where we move into the transnational, which is the cartel. There is the Salamanca cousins, who are these elements of the cartel. Danny Trejo, who we also saw he dies in this. He plays Tortuga, who I didn't put on the board, but we saw as well. He was the informant who got killed by the cartel. And then there's Don Eladio, the cartel boss, who also dies because Heisenberg defeats everybody. Don Eladio is played by the same actor who played the sidekick in the Al Pacino conversation, where Al Pacino plays a clip from Scarface that includes Al Pacino as Tony Montana, and his partner is played by the same actor who plays Don Eladio in the series. In addition, now returning to the local level, although they have the broader connections, is Crazy Eight, who reappears in Better Call Saul. There's Nodos and there's Gonzo. Jesus Payan came, and he usually is attributed with the role of Gonzo, but as he said, the names of Gonzo and Nodos were reversed. And I'm thankful again to Jesus Payan for coming to our class. So there's these characters which are also local, but they're connected. Then this is where we get to the transnational. Now let's take a moment and return to the regional element where you see Gus. Gus owns a regional set of restaurants. And by the way, if you ever want to, it's at Twister's down there in the South Valley. It's got the mural of Los Hermanos Pollo. Los Pollo, anyway, that's the fast food restaurant on its wall. And he's got his henchmen, Victor and Tyrus. We also see Saul Goodman and Mike Ehrmantraut. So there's these folks. Finally, later on in the series, we see Todd and Uncle Jack. And there is the multinational connection. Madrigal Industries. And the person who they interact most with at Madrigal Industries is Lydia Rodarte Quayle. Lydia herself is a Latina, but this comes back to some of these themes. She's light skinned. She's also clearly upper class of some sort. Lydia is Latina and not necessarily recognizably so, but she is of a different class and very light skinned. Coming back now to social class. I want to say something. This is my thesis a little bit about Breaking Bad. It also speaks to our moment in history. I think what this series is about ultimately is white middle class masculinity and it being in crisis. Walter White is a person, and I said some of this in class earlier, well, even over this last week and a half, that Walter White, and it's not a mistake that his last name is White, is a middle class man. And he's a middle class white man. He lives in the Northeast Heights. He lives in a pretty good neighborhood. He's got a good job. He does not have good insurance, which is something that so many of us are dealing with. Several people in our class come from countries where medical care is a right for everybody. But in our country, it's not. Walter White has fallen through the cracks of whatever safety net we have. Oh, some people who haven't, I didn't bring up, which are part of this discussion, are Gretchen and Elliot Schwartz. And they're going to play a role in what I'm going to talk about in just a moment. Gretchen, of course, and this speaks to the issues of gender, is Walter White's ex-girlfriend. Elliot is his ex-friend, and they are probably billionaires. They're probably the richest people that we see in this entire series. Maybe the magical industries is yet bigger than they are, but as individuals, they're richer and probably even richer than Don Eladio. Gretchen is his ex, and at some point it's also revealed that she probably does come from higher class origins. He complains about her being a rich girl. And one way of reading this series is, by the way, as thinking of Walter White is a terrible, terrible ex. Okay. Now, coming back to what I was speaking about before, Walter White is a white middle class man and he has some masculinity issues. We can see him coming into control of his masculinity One of the ways is in the different ways, and clearly guns. This is not reaching hard into deeply into psychoanalysis. Guns are a metaphor, are 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 a metaphor, right? In the first episode, he has difficulty handling Hank's gun. Later on, you see him buy a gun and you see him practicing to shoot it. And in the final scene, which I hope you have seen, I didn't get to show you. I was going to show you at the beginning of the class on Thursday, but we could not see because of the snow day, but he has become a virtuoso with guns, and he lays waste through his brilliance, his technical brilliance, and kills all these working class men of the Aryan nation. And then he goes up and confidently shoots a man in the head. So it's moved from a man who cannot handle a gun, a man practicing to using a gun, to a man fully in control of them and dominating the world with his guns. And there's also the theme of control. Walter White in this series wants to have control, but a bunch of the world is out of control, and he's trying to maintain control, but he can't fully maintain control. That's what the episode The Fly was about, and that, in some respects, is what the entire series about. The one person that he cannot control throughout the series fully is he dominates and in the end beats Gus. He dominates and in the end beats the cartel. In the end, he destroys Magical Industries. In the end, he destroys all these other people. He does succeed in dominating Skylar by certain means, but he never completely controls her. But Walter White is a middle class man who has a good job and lives in a good neighborhood, but he is struggling to have ends meet. And speaking as a middle class person, a middle class man, even with my income, which is more than most, but is not, I'm not rich by any means, it is very difficult for me to make ends meet. And I've been dealing with some issues around medical matters in my family. It's hard. So I understand some of those issues. But he is in a relatively privileged position with regards to Albuquerque and the world. Nevertheless, he does not control the world. He is dominated and controlled, but he shirks all this. He is able to defeat the Aryan nation, working class white people. He is able to defeat the Chicanos of Albuquerque. He is able to defeat the Mexican cartel. He is able to defeat Magical Industries, a global corporation, and the people in the final episode. So he defeats, and we see him kill Lydia. We see the end of what terrible things that are happening to Magical Industries. We also see him completely, in a way that strikes one as somewhat humiliating, dominate Gretchen and Elliot. His former peers who have gone on to become billionaires and far more powerful in many respects than he was, and maybe even is at the point of death, right? So finally, what is it and who is it that Walter White loves? If in Felina the song, if in Felina the song, the cowboy dies next to his love, who does Walter White die? Who does Heisenberg die? And I will remind you, earlier in the series, he said that he was doing all of this for his family. But in the final episode, we saw that he was doing this for himself. Who does he die by? He is stretched out with his arms to his side. Does Walter White die with Skylar? Does he rescue Walt Jr.? No. He rescues Jesse, the person who has learned the craft of making meth from him, and he dies next to the lab, the means of making meth. something where he is a virtuoso, something where he is the master. His love is not Skylar. His family is not his biological family. Jesse, the man who has learned and been his apprentice in making meth, the meth laboratory, this world where he can control is his true love. And that is where Walter White dies to the song Baby Blue. And I hope you enjoyed this semester and thank you all. Enjoyed teaching. I wish we had had that snow day and I wish all of you had been able to make it to that last class. Kudos to Jesus Payan Jr. for coming to see us and taking that time to speak with you. And I've enjoyed all of you. Come back and see me. If you are interested in Chicano studies or American studies, come and see me. I'm probably going to reach out to several of the majors to give them whatever advice I can. In addition, if you are thinking about going to graduate school or if there's any other ways I can help you individually, come back. You will be able to reach me through that Calendly calendar. I haven't set winter break office hours yet, but you can schedule them. You can schedule them next semester. And I would like to know how you and your work continues and how your lives go. All right. So thank you. I'll talk to you in the future, I hope.